The silence in our suburban home in Oak Creek, Illinois, used to be my sanctuary. It was the sound of a life well built. I'm David, or at least I was the David who thought 12 years of marriage to Elena meant something. I spent my days as a structural engineer, making sure things didn't collapse, never realizing my own foundation was being eaten away by rot. I came home early that Tuesday. The sky was that bruised shade of purple you only see before a storm. I had a bouquet of lilies, her favorite, and a promotion to celebrate. But when I pushed open our mahogany front door, the air felt heavy. Wrong. There were boots in the hallway. Not mine, not hers. Heavy leather boots that smelled of cheap cologne and rain. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. I walked up the stairs, every floorboard under the carpet feeling like a landmine. When I reached our bedroom, the door was ajar. And there she was, Elena, sitting on the edge of our Egyptian cotton sheets, wrapped in a silk robe, while a man I'd never seen before, thick-necked, tattooed, and looking entirely too comfortable, sat in my armchair. "David," she said, her voice devoid of the tremor I expected. She didn't jump. She didn't hide. She just looked at me with a cold, clinical detachment that froze the blood in my veins. "You're early, but maybe it's better this way. This is Julian, and before you say anything, you need to listen. I've decided I'm opening our marriage. It's the only way I can stay." The lilies slipped from my hand. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like. And let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. I stared at Julian. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just nodded at me like we were meeting at a dull PTA mixer. The audacity of it was a physical weight. "Opening the marriage?" I managed to choke out. "Elena, what are you talking about? We have a life. We have a home. We have a routine, David," she snapped, standing up. "I'm tired of being a line item in your budget." Julian gives me the excitement I've been craving. "I'm not leaving you. I like this house. I like our social standing. But I'm not giving him up either. Those are the terms. Accept it, or we can start the most expensive divorce this county has ever seen. And remember, my father's firm handles the city's legal contracts. You won't just lose me. Yes, you'll lose your career." She wasn't just breaking my heart, she was holding it for ransom. She expected me to crumble. She expected the nice guy, David, to just roll over so she could have her cake and her lover too. But as I looked at the smug expression on Julian's face, something shifted inside me. The structural engineer in me stopped looking at the cracks and started looking for the demolition points. I didn't scream. I didn't throw him out. I realized in that moment that if I fought her now, I'd lose everything. I needed time. I needed a plan. "Fine," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. "If this is what you need to be happy, Elena, I won't stand in your way." The look of pure, condescending triumph on her face was almost enough to make me break character. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken me so completely that I was willing to share my bed just to keep the lights on. Julian smirked, leaning back in my chair. "Smart man," Julian grunted. I left the room without another word. I went down to the kitchen, poured the expensive wine I'd bought for the promotion, and watched it swirl down the drain. I wasn't going to be a victim. If Elena wanted a new kind of marriage, I was going to give her exactly what she asked for. But the secrets were only just beginning to surface. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. If you were in my shoes, David's shoes, standing in that doorway, would you have walked out right then or stayed to play the long game? For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the dutiful, defeated husband. And I watched as Julian came and went. I watched Elena glow with a frantic, ugly kind of energy. She thought she was untouchable. But while they were distracted by their newfound freedom, I was busy. I didn't go to work. I took personal leave. I spent my days at a small, dusty office in downtown Chicago, meeting with a man named Miller. Miller wasn't an engineer. He was a forensic accountant with a side hustle in private investigation. "You were right to come to me," Miller said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your wife hasn't just been opening your marriage, David. She's been opening your offshore investment accounts. It seems Julian isn't just a lover, he's a professional leech with a history of targeting wealthy suburban women. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just about passion, it was a heist. Elena was being played. Why, and in her arrogance, she was dragging me down with her. But there was a twist she didn't know about. A secret my family had kept for generations. A trust fund tied to a property in the Ozarks that was legally bulletproof, provided the marriage remained intact. If Elena divorced me, she'd get half of everything we built in Oak Creek. But if she was proven to be complicit in a fraud scheme with Julian, or if I could prove she was under undue influence, the prenuptial agreement her own father had insisted on would kick in, stripping her of everything, including the family name she valued so much. I started documenting everything. The late-night whispers I recorded from the vents, the bank transfers Julian thought were hidden, and the way Elena looked at me with such pity every morning over coffee. "You look tired." "Or David," she said one morning, her hand resting on the counter near a stack of Julian's mail. "Maybe you should take a trip. Go see your brother in Seattle. Give us some space." "I think that's a great idea, Elena," I lied, smiling at her. "In fact, I think we should all have a little more space." I wasn't going to Seattle. I was going to the police station. But I wasn't reporting a crime yet. I was setting a trap. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hits you the hardest in David's story, the betrayal of the bed or the betrayal of the bank account. Share your thoughts in the comments. I didn't go to Seattle. Instead, I checked into a nondescript motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the neon sign flickers and no one asks for a real name. I needed a war room. For 3 days. Now I lived on black coffee and adrenaline, mapping out every transaction Julian and Elena had made. It turns out Julian wasn't just a leech. He was a seasoned con artist. He had 3 different aliases across the Midwest. But Elena, in her desperation to feel alive, had bypassed all the safety protocols I'd spent years setting up. She had given him access to our joint secondary holdings. She thought she was buying his love. She was actually funding his next disappearance. I felt a cold shiver of clarity. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting to keep the legacy my parents had left me. My channel, Family Secrets and Revenge, is built on the idea that the truth always comes out, but usually it needs a little push. I was about to give it a shove. I returned home on Friday evening. The house smelled like expensive takeout and Julian's oppressive cologne. I found them in the dining room, laughing over a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. "David, you're back early," Elena said, her eyes narrowing. She looked disappointed. "I missed home," I said, offering a tight, practiced smile. "And I realized I haven't been a very good host to Julian. Since we're all being open now, I thought I'd cook a formal dinner tomorrow night, a celebration of this new chapter." Julian looked at Elena, a greedy glint in his eyes. He probably thought I was going to hand over more keys to the kingdom. "Sounds good to me, Dave," he said, leaning back and putting his feet up on my hand-carved oak table. "Perfect," I replied. "I've invited a few guests, people who have a vested interest in our family's future." The next evening, the atmosphere in the Oak Creek house was electric. Elena was dressed to the nines, draped in diamonds I'd bought her for our 10th anniversary. Julian wore a suit that was clearly bought with my money. At 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Elena frowned. "Who did you invite, David? I thought this was just a small gathering." "Just some old friends," I said, opening the door. In walked Miller, my forensic accountant, followed by a tall man in a charcoal suit named Marcus Thorne, the lead investigator for the state's insurance fraud division. Behind them stood Elena's father, Arthur. Arthur was a man of ironclad reputation, and seeing his daughter with a man like Julian in his house was like watching a cathedral burn. "Dad," Elena gasped, her face draining of color. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to see the open marriage you've been boasting about," Arthur said, his voice like grinding stones. "If you were standing where David was, watching the person you loved realize their world was about to end, would you feel pity, or would you feel the weight of justice? Share your thoughts below." We sat in the living room. I didn't serve food, I served folders. "Elena, you told me you wanted an open marriage," I began, my voice steady. "And I agreed. But what you didn't mention was that your new partner, Julian, or should I call him Derek Vane, as he's known in Ohio, has been systematically draining the trust fund your father set up for our future children. Julian stood up, his face contorting into a mask of rage. This is bull. Sit down, Mr. Vane, Marcus Thorne intervened, flashing his badge. On you, we've been tracking the wire transfers you initiated from David's IP address. It seems you were planning to skip town on Monday with approximately $400,000 of the Sterling family's assets. Elena looked at Julian, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and disbelief. Julian, is that true? Julian didn't look at her. He looked at the window. He was a cornered rat, and the gold-plated cage he'd been living in was closing fast. He told me we were investing in a boutique hotel in Cabo, Elena screamed, turning on him. He said we were building a life together. He says that to everyone, Elena, I said softly. But the real kicker isn't the money. It's the clause in our prenuptial agreement. Article 12, Section 4. During any spouse found to be willfully engaging in financial malfeasance or conspiracy to defraud the marital estate forfeits all rights to alimony, property, and shared assets. I looked at Arthur. He wouldn't even look at his daughter. He had spent his life building a name, and Elena had dragged it through the mud for a man who didn't even know her middle name. I'm not just divorcing you, Elena, I continued. I'm filing for a full annulment based on fraud. You aren't getting the house. You aren't getting the car. And thanks to Julian's little spending spree, your personal credit is currently in the gutter. The next hour was a blur of shouting, tears, and the cold snap of handcuffs. Julian was taken away in a squad car for interstate fraud. Elena was left standing in the foyer of a house she no longer owned, surrounded by the ghosts of a marriage she had burned for a thrill. David, please, she sobbed, reaching for my arm. I made a mistake. He manipulated me. We can fix this. We can go back. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel pain. I felt nothing. The foundation was gone. There was nothing left to build on. I told you I wouldn't stand in your way, Elena, I said, opening the front door. You wanted to be open. Now you're open to the world, alone. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in David's story and share your thoughts in the comments. Was it her father's arrival or the moment Julian's true identity was revealed? The door clicked shut, and for the first time in 12 years, the house was truly quiet. It wasn't the peaceful silence I had once cherished. It was the hollow ring of a tomb. I walked through the rooms, seeing the imprints of a life that had been a lie. I spent that night in the guest room. I couldn't bear the scent of that cheap cologne lingering in the master suite. As I lay there, I realized that while I had won the legal battle, the emotional wreckage was a mountain I still had to climb. But I wasn't alone. I had the truth, and in the world of family secrets and revenge, that is the only currency that matters. The following weeks were a whirlwind of depositions and bank statements. Miller and I discovered that Elena had been complicit in forging my signature on a second mortgage. She was so desperate to keep Julian, to keep the fantasy alive, that she was willing to gamble the very roof over our heads. Every document I unearthed was another brick in the wall I was building between my past and my future. I found emails, cold, calculating threads where she joked about my predictability. She called me a safety net that didn't know it was being cut. Reading those words hurt worse than seeing them together. Oak Creek is a small town with a long memory. Word of the open marriage and the subsequent fraud arrest spread like wildfire. Elena tried to stay with friends, but one by one the doors closed. People who had once sought her advice now looked away when they saw her in the grocery store. Her father, Arthur, remained true to his word. He didn't just cut her off financially. He removed her from the board of the family foundation. He told me over a glass of scotch that tasted like ash. I didn't raise a thief, David. Why, I raised a daughter. I don't know who that woman in the foyer was. A month later, Elena called me. I almost didn't answer, but I needed closure. We met at a public park. She looked different. The silk robes and diamonds were gone, replaced by a tired sweater and eyes that had finally seen the bottom of the pit she dug. I have nothing, David, she whispered. I'm staying in a studio apartment in the city. I'm working as a receptionist. Is this what you wanted? To see me destroyed? I didn't destroy you, Elena, I said. I just stopped protecting you from yourself. You opened the door. I just let the draft blow everything away. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Do you believe Elena deserves a chance at redemption? Or is some damage simply too deep to ever be repaired? I sold the house in Oak Creek. I couldn't stay in a place where the walls held those memories. I moved to a small modern loft in the city, closer to my work, closer to the pulse of a life that was finally mine. I started focusing on my career again, but with a new perspective. Bridges, buildings, marriage, they all require the same thing: integrity. Without it, the most beautiful structure is just a pile of rubble. Julian, or Derek, is currently serving 5 to 7 years in a state penitentiary. Elena reaches out occasionally, usually when a bill is due or the loneliness gets too loud. But I've learned the power of the word no. I realized that the hook of her opening the marriage wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of my clarity. So she expected me to be a victim of her desires, but she didn't expect me to be the architect of my own liberation. Revenge isn't always about fire and brimstone. Sometimes it's just about letting someone live with the choices they made while you move on to something better. As I sit here today, the sun is shining through my new floor-to-ceiling windows. The air is clear. No cheap cologne, no heavy secrets. My life is finally open, but in the way I choose, open to honesty, open to genuine connection, and open to a future I built with my own two hands. If you ever find yourself standing at the edge of a betrayal, remember, you are the engineer of your own soul. You decide which walls stay up and which ones need to come down. Thank you so much for joining me today on Family Secrets and Revenge. This story was a difficult one to tell. But I hope it serves as a reminder that your value is not determined by how someone else treats you. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, leave a comment with your overall thoughts, and subscribe to Family Secrets and Revenge for more cinematic journeys into the truth. How would you have handled the opening of your life? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Until next time.